Hi everyone, in this video we're going to outline how and why a low carb diet works. So these have become very popular in the last few years or so. There's lots of different variations on what a low carb diet is. So I wanted to really explain to people how these actually work in terms of helping people to lose weight and fat mainly. So we're going to make a start. The first thing we're going to go through is what is a carbohydrate. So a carbohydrate is one of the three main macronutrients, and the other two macronutrients are proteins and fats. Now essentially a carbohydrate is always broken down into glucose, which is pretty much the most simple of sugars. Okay, so some examples of what a carbohydrate is anything that is derived from grain, and therefore any grain-based products like bread, pasta, anything that's very starchy or high in starch like potatoes, anything that is a sugar, so sweets, Coca-Cola are full of carbohydrates, but that also means that a lot of fruits are fairly high in carbohydrates as well. So, what is a low carb diet? It pretty much is what it says on the tin. A low carb diet is where you restrict the intake of carbohydrates, and usually you limit this intake to between 30 and 100 grams of carbohydrate intake per day, and that really depends upon the severity of the low carb diet that you are aiming for. Some of the low carb diets, like the Atkins diet, is literally as few carbs as you can possibly eat. So because you are massively restricting your carbohydrate intake to maintain your calorific intake, so therefore as not to go hungry, you increase your intakes of proteins and healthy fats. Now another common theme with a low carb diet is you also reduce the intake of processed foods as well. This seems to be a common theme that runs throughout them. It probably is a good one to also adhere to, even if you are on a normal diet. Processed foods aren't the best anyway. So, to give you an example of how much carbohydrate that is when you're on a low carb diet, one single slice of white bread can contain between 15 and 30 grams of carbohydrates. So just to put it into a bit of perspective for you. So what effect does carbohydrate consumption have on the body? This is really important to understand. Carbohydrates, once you eat them, they are broken down into glucose. Okay? They therefore directly increase your blood glucose concentration. Now, this happens with direct correlation. And what that means is the more carbohydrates that you eat, the greater your blood glucose concentration will rise. So, what does an increase in blood glucose concentration do? Well, increase in blood glucose concentration stimulates insulin secretion, and again, this happens with direct correlation. That means the higher your blood glucose level is, the greater insulin is secreted to manage that glucose. Now, there is something that affects this as well, and that is called glycemic index. Now, glycemic index is attributed to anything that is classed as a carbohydrate. And what it essentially means is how quickly, when you consume that carbohydrate, will your blood glucose level increase. Okay? The highest carbohydrate, the carbohydrate that has the highest glycemic index is pure glucose. So everything is factored in relation to that. Now, a good example for you to understand when it comes to glycemic index is brown and white bread. So you may have heard that brown bread is slow release, and that essentially is attributed to its glycemic index. What that means is that if you take two pieces of bread, one white, one brown, if you eat the white one, your blood glucose level would raise quicker than the brown bread. Now that's an important thing to understand when it comes to blood glucose elevations and levels and things like that, but it's not really what we're going to go into today. So once you've got your head around that, we now need to understand what effect insulin has on the body. So insulin is a hormone secreted by the pancreas, and what it does is allows cells to absorb glucose from the bloodstream and use that glucose as an energy source. Okay, it's really important. Without insulin, cells cannot use glucose. It's like a key. Insulin enables the cells to absorb the glucose. Now, there is an exception when it comes to those cells. Brain cells are the only cells that can actually use glucose without insulin. The rest of the body cannot. So, you need insulin. However, because insulin is a hormone, it also has other effects on the body. Insulin also inhibits the breakdown of fats in the body to be used as an energy source. So, everybody has fats within their body, and when the body is low on energy or calories, what the body does is it breaks those fats down and uses them as energy. Insulin stops this from happening. What insulin also does is it signals the body to store any excess glucose that's within the bloodstream as glycogen and then fat. So, let's put this into perspective. You've just had a very large carbohydrate-filled meal, and then you've had a pudding on top. Any glucose that's in your bloodstream that does not need to be used as an energy source right now, insulin will trigger any of that glucose to be stored directly into glycogen and fat. So, once we've understood that, you should now see how this starts to work. If you reduce your carbohydrate intake, you will reduce your glucose level overall as standard. If you reduce your blood glucose concentration overall, you reduce your overall insulin. If you reduce the insulin in your system, that will prevent those negative pathways that we've just discussed from occurring. That will therefore increase the amount of fat that you burn, and it will also reduce the fat storage side of things when you're eating very high carbohydrate filled meals. And through that, it will reduce body fat. I hope that makes sense. Essentially, this is how these types of diets work. Now, if we compare that to a traditional diet, people can lose weight on a traditional diet, but those diets usually restrict two things: fats and calories. And it is true that if you burn more calories than you consume, you will lose weight. The reason why people really struggle with this is a traditional diet essentially means you're hungry all the time. With this kind of low carb diet, you don't have the same calorific restriction, but you do have a restriction on carbohydrates, as we've explained. So I hope that's helped you get your head around why these things work. Now, I've put some further resources in the links below. There are some really good books and diet plans that really help you, first of all, get your head around this further, but also get you thinking about what kinds of foods you can eat and the kinds of foods that you need to avoid if you are going to follow one of these plans. It is easy to follow once you've got your head around it. It does require a little bit of commitment, especially if you're a carb lover, but nothing comes for free. So please check out those links in the description below. Those will certainly help you out further. If this video's helped you, please like or subscribe to the channel or both. That certainly helps me out. Thanks for watching. See you next time.